In this video, we're going to talk about rhythm and time signature. So rhythm is basically the way a song sounds other than your melody. So we talked about notes and how things can have different frequencies. But what we didn't really consider was how fast those frequencies came. So that's when rhythm and beat comes into picture. So the beat is pretty simple. Any song, you know that there's a beat, like you could clap your hands to or stamp your feet to. So you know that these, like there's some sort of basic beat to a song, and this is actually called the time signature. Except it's not just that. So the time signature tells you that any song can be divided into smaller beats, and smaller groups of beats, that is. And these groups of beats are called measures. So the distinctive quality of a measure is that the first beat of that measure is going to be stronger, right? It's going to be a strong beat. So, for example, if we look at the song Happy Birthday, right? The Happy Birthday song, it sounds like Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you, right? So if you notice, there was an accent. It was a little stronger on the birthday, like the burr, and on you, right? Happy birthday to you, right? So this stronger beat signifies the start of a measure. And if you notice, there were some other smaller beats after that burr and you. Those beats are the weaker beats, but they're still part of that measure. So in total, there were 3 beats that we did, starting from the first strong beat. And then we went birthday, so that was 1, 2, 3, and then you, that was 1, 2, 3 again. So if you notice, the song is divided into 3. That's the quotient. So that shows that the time signature is 3. Except that's not it. Time signatures don't only tell you the number of beats in a measure, they can also tell you the type of beat. So what does that mean? Well, any beat can be divided, right? It can be a smaller beat, like a faster beat, or it can be a longer beat where you just wait for a very long time until the note's over, right? So these beats are usually divided into 2. So the first beat is a whole note, and that can be divided into 2. A half note, right? Because half of a whole is half, right? And a half can be divided into 2, that's quarter. Quarter can be divided into 2, eighth. Eighth note can be divided into 2, 16th note. So it's just basic math, you'll get the hang of it, because what you're doing is you're multiplying the previous beat by half, right? So 1 times 1 by 2 is 1 by 2, 1 by 2 times 1 by 2 is 1 by 4, and etc. So these are the types of beats: whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, and 16th note. But there are also more. There's 32nd notes and 64th notes. It just keeps going. But we're not really going to talk about those because it's a little complicated, and it's unlikely that you'll come across it in the early stages of learning piano, or any instrument for that matter. So yeah, these are the notes. And then there's also one more thing. So now we've learned the 2 basic components of a time signature. We learned the type of beats and the number of beats in a measure. So say you had 4 beats in a song, right? Like it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So its time signature could either be, and this is how we write it, this is just a notation, could be 4-2, 4-4, 4-8. Now, one thing to notice, it's not a fraction, okay? It's just telling you 2 components of the time signature. So the 4 represents the number of beats in a measure. So this 4 represents that there are 4 beats in the song, in the measure. But what about these numbers? Well, these numbers just tell you what type of note it is. So say it's 2, it's a half note. And that makes sense because we know that a half note was 1 by 2. And if it was 4, then it's a quarter note. Also makes sense, it's 4. And eighth note is 8, so obviously it would be 4-8. So that just means, so all of these just tell you that there are 4 beats, but this is a half note. There are 4 half notes in a measure. This tells you that there are 4 quarter notes in a measure. This tells you there are 4 eighth notes in a measure. Now you might ask, so what's the difference between a half note and a quarter note? well, because we've just learned about it mathematically wise, but it just means that it's faster. So a half note would take, it would take half amount of time as a whole note, whereas a quarter note would take quarter the amount of time as a whole note. That's a lot smaller than half. So now we can move on to the other types of number of beats. Here we have 3 beats in a measure. So that means it can be 3/2, 3/4, 3/8. So the thing is, all of these are just types of time signatures that I've just come up with it on the spot. But there are a lot more. There can be 4/16. That means there are 4/16 notes. There could be 2/1 maybe, but that's a little weird because you're only going to have a whole note for the entire song. It's not a lot of variation. So these are the types of signatures. Time signatures. But now we have to look a little bit into the types of notes, the types of beats. So if you remember earlier when we were doing the previous videos, and I would tell you that this note is either an F or C depending on what line it is on the staff, right? Well, all of those notes, they were sort of symbols, right? And those symbols, there are actually a lot of types of symbols, namely these. So this note, like if it's just a circle, it represents a whole note. That means you play it for the time of a whole note. So you're just going to play it as 1, right? But this is a half note, so you're going to play it as half of 1. So, and the half note has a circle and a stick. This is a very important distinction, as well as this. This is a filled circle with a stick, and this has the little loop, and this has 2 loops. So those are the symbols for each of these notes that we looked at earlier, right? All of these notes, they can basically be represented like this. And rest is actually pretty interesting, and I like rest because you basically just don't play anything, right? So the time it takes to play, say, a whole note, you just rest. You don't play anything for a whole note, and you denote it by drawing this. And the same thing for this. This is the time of a half note, this is for quarter note, etc. So that's it. These are your notes. But there is one very important thing to understand. We don't always just talk about notes like this. We always talk about it in terms of a time signature. So say we were talking about the time signature 4/4. Now if you remember, what does that mean? There are 4 quarter notes in a measure. Right? So that means this is a quarter note, you're going to have 4 quarter notes in a measure. But that also means you can only have 2 half notes in a measure. But that doesn't mean it's 2. But this is just a way of representing it, because when we talk about half notes in a 4/4 time signature, we're saying that the half note has 2 counts, because we were talking about quarter notes. Right? We're talking about it from the reference of a quarter note. Everything is in terms of it. So when we talk about half note, that means there are 2 quarters and a half, right? So that means we will have 2 quarter beats in a half note. So when we play this, it's going to be 1, 2, right? Except we're not, beating it 2 times because it's a half note, so it's just going to be 1, 2. But that 2, that 1, 2, comes from the fact that the time is in a quarter note. And this whole note means that there are 4 quarter notes, right? Because there are 4 quarters in 1, right? So that means 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is even trickier. So this is more like there are half eighth notes in a quarter note, right? So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, right? That was technically the time of 4 quarter notes, but I've just played 8 eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 16th notes, they're going to be 4 16th notes. So that's a little hard to play, but yeah, that's just basically how we talk about a quarter note in terms of other notes. And it can also be rest. So yeah, that's it for rhythm and time signature. I hope this helped.